The reading this morning is by Molly Larkin, a co-author of the international bestseller, The Wind is My Mother, The Life and Teachings of a Native American Shaman. What is the seventh generation principle and why do you need to know about it, she asks. Whenever I mention the seventh generation principle to most people, they think I'm talking about laundry detergent. I'm always surprised that more people don't know the origin of the term. The seventh generation principle taught by Native Americans tells us that in every decision, be it personal, governmental, or corporate, we ought to consider how it will affect our descendants 7 generations in the future, so that the pristine sky, field, and mountains will still be there for them to enjoy. A generation is generally considered to be 25 years, so that's 175 years. It's clearly not embraced by most governments and corporations in the world today. I mean, when was the last time any of us thought about who's coming along 7 generations from now? The seventh generation principle was so important to Native American cultures that it was codified in the Iroquois Great Law of Peace. Long before environmentalists were talking about carbon footprints and sustainability, indigenous peoples lived in balance with the world around them. And their words in many of their native languages that mean we're all related to and respect everything in life. Native American tribes don't even have a word for ecology. Respect for the earth was so ingrained in their lifestyle that one word would be too limiting. The earliest recording of the seventh generation principle dates back to the Great Law of Peace of the Iroquois Confederacy created in the 12th century. And when our founding fathers looked for models of effective government and human liberty upon which they could model our Constitution for our 13 colonies, they found it in the government of the Iroquois Confederacy, which at that point had stood for hundreds of years. Ironically, in drafting our Constitution, our founders left out one of the essential principles of the Great Law of Peace, the seventh generation principle. It's ironic because it's the very heart of this very successful model of government. The Iroquois Great Law of Peace today has stood for 1,000 years. It's the omission of the seventh generation principle of the role of women in government that led Native Americans to say, the U.S. copied the Great Law of the Peace, but didn't really understand it. To live by this principle, one would ask, prior to any undertaking, how it will affect the land, water, air, animals, birds, plants, and the future of our children 7 generations into the future. How does that apply to you? Think about where you build a house, what kind of a car you drive. Do you throw out or do you recycle? What kind of impact are you making on the earth? What kind of message are you giving your children? Teach them by example. And always ask, will the decisions we make today be beneficial for our descendants? Remember that everything we do matters. If we live our lives from that idea, we will leave the earth a better place. Our reading 2 weeks ago introducing the November theme of ancestry started with this quotation by Ralph Ellison. Some people are your relatives, but others are your ancestors. And you choose the ones you want to have as ancestors. You create yourself out of those values. Choosing our ancestors is one of the ways that we place ourselves in our own place in the long history of human life on earth, both before and after us. One of the ancestors I choose is Theodore Parker, Unitarian minister in Roxbury and then in Boston, a fervent abolitionist who died in 1860, just at the beginning of the Civil War. One of the stories about Parker that's told in one of our storybooks for children comes from his memoirs. He tells about how he was 4 years old. He was looking all around his father's farm on a beautiful summer day. He was loving the smells, the trees blowing in the slight wind, and there was a little pond on their farm where he found a turtle sitting on a rock. He was curious about what turtles did, and he thought he would pick up a stick and whack the turtle and see what happened. But while the stick was still in the air, he heard a voice saying, "It is wrong." Startled, he dropped the stick and ran off to find his father, who told him that what he'd heard was the voice of God, his conscience, telling him what was right and what was wrong to do. His father told him that he must always listen to that voice and honor it. And when he came to manhood, Parker listened to that inner voice telling him that slavery was wrong, that it was evil, and that he must do whatever he could to end it. And in particular, he became deeply involved in resistance to the fugitive slave law, which compelled every person to do whatever they could to return a slave to his or her master. He personally sheltered one such escaped slave. He reported that he kept a pistol by the side of his desk as he was preparing his sermons, so that if anyone came to take the slave away, he could protect him. He was actually the first megachurch minister in the United States. At one point, his 28th Congregational Society in Boston had over 2,600 members. They met in the biggest theater in Boston. Parker said, "I do not understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I can see, I'm sure it bends toward justice." These words, which I've adopted as part of my email signature, were the inspiration for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's version, saying, "The arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And it was Parker who first formulated the description of our United States Constitution, incorporated into Lincoln's Gettysburg Address: government of the people, for the people, and by the people. That's an ancestor that I choose for my life and my ministry. If only I could be as brave and as clear as Parker was about what is right, what is wrong, and what is most important for me to dedicate my life to. Each of us stands in the middle of the history of the human race. We inhabit the in-between. We inherit what's come before us, and we sow the seeds for what will come after us. We have ancestors from the past, and we are becoming the ancestors that future generations will either come to honor or to blame for the world that they will inherit. It therefore behooves each of us to consider what seeds we're sowing for the next 7 generations who will inhabit this beloved earth of which we are the stewards in our generations. Our first task as ancestors to be is to find our own place in that long history of life, human life on Mother Earth. And as we consider what our lives are like today, we can look back on the hard work of many generations in bringing about the relative material prosperity that we enjoy today. In the United States, a lot of that work and a lot of the capital that undergirds our own prosperity, including the founding endowments of a number of our universities, was created by slaves and by workers who were compelled to work long hours under very harsh conditions. We can be proud of ancestors who, like Theodore Parker, labored to end the curse of slavery in our land, and those who helped to organize unions and built up labor solidarity to equalize the playing field between employers and workers. This required struggle, as Frederick Douglass put it. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it is a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out what people will submit to, and you found out the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. And tyrants tremble sick with fear and hear their death knells ringing, how can I keep from singing? Ancestors like Douglass helped to create the future in which we now live. But we've also inherited a world where freedom for many is constrained by the excessive wealth of a few. Not all the consequences of generations of slavery are behind us. So our work here at First Parish in helping to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline, our work in our Read to Me Father program in helping incarcerated fathers to stay in relationship to their children, at the Bridgewater Old Colony Correctional Center, and our willingness to search for ways of supporting just mercy, in the words of our UUA Common Read that we'll be discussing in December. These are all ways that we recognize that we can help to right some of the injustices that we also have inherited from our ancestors. So we need to find our place, our particular place, in the middle between the past and the future, and discover in ourselves the particular gifts and capacities that we've been given so that we can each play our respective roles, bolstered by ancestors we choose, burdened by ancestors whose lives were less honorable. Second thing we need to think about is cleaning up our own messes. We have benefited from extraordinary growth of productivity from the industrial and technical revolutions that have radically improved the standard of living for people all over the world, though certainly not for all. But this increase in wealth has also bequeathed us with some burdens, notably the level of carbon dioxide in the air, which is the proximate cause of the rapid and devastating climate change that we're just beginning to experience, and that will undoubtedly encumber the lives of our descendants, to whom we are becoming ancestors. We each need to find our own place in the chain of benefits and responsibilities that this inheritance entails. Each of us can do our own small part for reducing the burden of pollution from which our descendants will suffer. And this congregation can play a part as well, notably from the work of our Green Sanctuary Committee, and hopefully by installing solar panels as part of our means of reducing our reliance as a community on fossil fuel energy. It's not only climate change that will be the consequence of our stewardship of the earth. Environmental lawyer Carolyn Ratzenberger provides a concrete example of how a failure to consider the 7 generations after us, the descendants of whom we will be the ancestors, can leave enormous burdens on their shoulders. The Giant Mine is a huge gold mine located on the Ingraham Trail just outside of Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories of Canada. 70 years of gold mining there, ending in 2004 when the last owner went bankrupt, have left over 17,000 tons of arsenic trioxide dust, which threaten to dump large amounts of arsenic into Yellowknife Bay. This substance will remain toxic for 25,000 years. Not 7, but 1,000 generations, during which the potential for devastating harm is entailed by the work of just 3 generations of exploitation. Raffensperger cites this as one example of why we must adopt the precautionary principle, assuring that choices we make now will not leave devastation in the future, thinking of at least 7 generations rather than only our own. That's the second part of what we must do as we craft our ancestry in the future, cleaning up our own messes. We teach our children to clean up their own messes. We take it as a matter of course that we should leave natural places after we visit them at least as clean as we found them. And we need to take broader responsibility as generations and as individuals to do the same for our Mother Earth. We are, as our 7th Unitarian Universalist principle puts it, part of the interconnected web of life. And we humans of every generation have the ability to harm or to heal that web, to damage it or to repair it for the 7 and hopefully many more generations whose ancestors we are becoming. We also sometimes make or inherit emotional messes. Some of our families are torn apart by large or trivial arguments or by abuse of one generation, by its predecessor, or by mental illness or addiction. We need to do our best to right the wrongs that we have a part in, and also the ones that we've inherited. We need to listen to what Theodore Parker called the voice of God as we find our own place in the great chain of human beings behind us and in front of us. We need to recognize that our United States of America has left messes in other parts of the world. Most obviously today from our foolhardy intervention in Iraq during the last decade. An intervention that sowed some of the poisonous seeds that came to maturity in Paris 2 nights ago. Fruits of our own foolishness that have helped Iraq and Syria to descend into barbarity and hatred. Many of us foresaw some of these consequences and demonstrated against it before the war started. But all of us are reaping the evil consequences that have flowed from it. And then finally, we need to commit ourselves to making peace whenever it is possible. Our religious tradition goes back to the Unitarians in Transylvania, among whose successors are the members of our partner church in Haringog, whom we remember each week by lighting a chalice in their honor. King John Sigismund of Transylvania issued an Edict of Toleration in 1568 as his contribution to preventing in Transylvania the potentially lethal conflicts between religious sects within his own kingdom, thereby preventing at least some of the devastation from religious wars that raged in many other parts of Europe. Toleration alone will not end wars or terrorism or environment devastation, especially the severe drought that's behind much of the unrest in the Middle East and in Africa. But as we attempt to apply our first principle, affirming and promoting the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we need to do whatever we can to counter the demagogic attempts of some to denigrate all Muslims or all immigrants or all of those whom they make out to be others into strangers, into enemies for their own political or personal gain. As the Buddha says, hatred does not cease by hatred at any time. Hatred ceases by love. This is an ancient and unalterable rule. We stand in the middle between the past and the future. We've inherited both good and evil. We need to find our place in the great stream of humanity and in the web of life of which we are a small but very critical part. We need to clean up the messes that we've inherited and that we would otherwise bequeath. And we need to make peace whenever we can. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese Buddhist monk, first came to prominence as the representative of the Buddhist Peace Conference at the Paris Peace Talks over Vietnam. offers these 5 awarenesses to help us find our place. He says, students of the Buddha are aware that life is one, and that happiness is not an individual matter. By living and practicing awareness, we bring peace and joy to our lives and the lives of those related to us. The first awareness. We are aware that all generations of our ancestors and all future generations are present within us. 2, we are aware of the expectations that our ancestors, our children, and their children have of us. Third awareness. We're aware that our joy, peace, freedom, and harmony are the joy, peace, freedom, and harmony of our ancestors, our children, and their children. 4, we are aware that understanding is the very foundation of love. And the 5th awareness, we are aware that blaming and arguing can never help us and only create a wider gap between us, that only understanding, trust, and love can help us change and grow. So may it be with us, and blessed be.